Oh, by the way, Twina, could you pass me the list of groups, the groups and their members, so I can input them in Moodle before anyone uploads?
I'm going to do that.
Okay, thank you. So I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so let's begin. Today we are going to look at ICT policy planning. Last time we met, we looked at ICT strategy. So we understand that ICT policy planning comes after ICT strategy. And it is actually the policy planning implements strategy. This is one way we implement strategy. So for us to understand what it is, we begin by defining what policy is. Now, when we look at the word policy, it has different meanings depending on the context one is looking at. In our particular case, we are looking at policy in the context of management. If you look at it from the government's perspective, it's almost similar. They are basically principles and guidelines by which government works, and they are meant to achieve a certain goal. So it's quite similar to that of management. But if you look at it from an insurance point of view, this is a different thing. It's actually a formal contract between the insurer and the insurance company to cover certain costs. But when we come to management and of course to at government level, we're looking at a set of basic principles and guidelines which are meant to govern an organization. And basically, I'm also meant to direct and limit the actions of the organizations or department as they try to achieve certain long-term goals. Okay, certain long-term goals. Now, of course, these long-term goals would have been defined in the strategic plan. So that is the point of a policy in general. Now, when we come to this slide, we give the proper definition and meaning, basically from what we have just stated. Now, a policy is made to implement. They are made to implement a strategy. Yeah. And it's essentially meant to be implemented itself. It's also meant to be implemented, but it is an implementation of the strategy. But the policy itself must be implemented so that we are able to see the strategy come into full play. Now, just like the strategic plan, the policy also has an expiry date. It's a living document which has a start time and an end time. So we normally state that it's for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, of course, depending on the policy, on the strategy itself. But the policy itself is constantly reviewed and can be changed. Yeah, that's one of the things that we normally see outlined in a policy document, that it's not set in stone. Changes can be made depending on if there's a change in the environment. So why would we have policy? One of the most important things we do is to ensure that IT resources are not abused. We shall normally find in an ICT policy or in any policy, you have rules and regulations about how resources are supposed to be used. For example, emails, how the email services of a particular organization are supposed to be used, or any communication platform for that matter. How computer labs or computers belonging to the organizations are supposed to be used and for what purpose. It also looks at the information resources, and this is key because information nowadays is power. Now, every organization has information, but this particular information that is extremely important to an organization. For example, if you go to a hospital, it's patient's data. Anything concerning a patient is extremely important. If you go to a bank, it comes to, again, to somebody's financial information or access to somebody's financial information. It's extremely important. If you come to, let's say, an organization like UMU, results are extremely important. And we want to protect any information that is important. Then it's also to protect employees, okay? The purpose of the policy is also to protect employees. Why? When you're dealing with any information, an employee must know their limits, that this is what I have access to, this is what I do not have access to. And once you know that, you're more or less protected in your position. Then the policy also provides guidelines on decisions that must be made in managing IT, the IT department, or the IT resources. The policy also actually helps to integrate governance, corporate governance, to the organization. Then also to meet regulatory and legal and ethical requirements, especially when it comes to information resources, because we normally have regulatory and legal requirements for organizations as regards to data privacy and protection. So the policy ensures that those within the organization are adhering to the external regulatory and legal requirements. So where do an organization's ICT and IT policies fit in? Where do they fit in? Let's start at the bottom. Number one, it's an ICT management description. Yeah. It gives guidance to the CIO or head of ICT on the business objectives, and giving direction to the CIO on how to implement the organization's business objectives. That it gives that overall description. Let's come to the second. It also guides the procedures, the policies and procedures for the everyday work for the IT department. The general, the basic procedures that must be followed. For example, on security, what your systems administrator or your security ICT security admin, or what infrastructure should he or she put up to guide the security of information or security of the internal network and so on and so forth. It gives those procedures that are necessary. Then also it is a huge guidance for the board of directors to know how to evaluate resources that have been implemented. Now, I'm sure you've all read the Clarion case study by now. And you see something like this. You've seen the case was hinting at something like this, and you can begin to relate what an ICT policy would have done, how resourceful it would have been for the Clarion School for Boys. Do we have any questions so far or any comment?
No, doctor. Yeah, following.
Okay, so let's move on. So here's the graphical image of where the ICT policy lies. The central part is, of course, with the ICT department, where we are looking at management of the ICT department. For the internal ICT department to know how they are supposed to run, and for the CIO to know how to govern the department. Then it gives directions to ICT policies and procedures to other departments that are handling ICT. What should be done? For example, if if you have issues on data information security, it would guide the finance department who should have access to what information within the department, or the sales department, the customers themselves have access to information. What should they have access to? And then it comes to the general pool of the company policies and procedures. Then for governance itself, of course, it supports the CIO, and then also to corporate governance, the board of directors, to know how their value for money, that the value for money they have allowed to be invested, how it is giving return. Now we come back to the significance of the ICT policy. The ICT policy, like we said earlier, it actually outlines what the ICT strategy is all about. It actually puts it into operation. Now, there are three things that are central to a policy, but they are not limited to that. Depending on the organization, this can expand further to other things. For example, when UMU has a policy on e-learning, and that should be essentially part of the overall ICT or IT policy. That's because UMU has e-learning is part and parcel of it. UMU should have a policy on Google Mail, should have a policy on email, but there's also our mails are hosted on Google Mail, on Google itself, the Google platform. So that one has to be a separate policy that exists. But centrally, for all policies, they should have these three sections as part and parcel: training, security, and procurement. This is an important part of any ICT policy. Also, another major characteristic is that an ICT policy must be regularly reviewed. Same thing as the ICT strategy, where it stems from. As we earlier said, it's a living document. It has a start and an end time. So it must have periodic points of review to see that it's achieving the business objectives that it's supposed to. Now, an ICT policy is usually part and parcel of an employee's contract, especially not all of it, but some sections should be part of it. Take an example. If you are looking at a policy on the firewall, it may not be necessarily be part of the employee's contract, but things like email communication etiquette, how to use the email, basic security standards for passwords, things like that. That should essentially be part and parcel of the overall of the security of the stand of an employee's contract. So the employee reads through it and signs it to indicate that they are comply or they agree to comply with the policy. Now, also, this also comes back to, in case the employee does break any of the procedures, the disciplinary action can be taken. Now, we look at the training policy. What does a training policy cover? Or this would be rather a sub-policy, part and parcel of the overall policy. What would the training policy cover? It would cover who is eligible for the training policy. For example, on how to use the core organizational systems that should be used. Look at the Clarion case study. And it was clear that there was some departments were barely given any training. And they were talking about, oh, I hear that the system actually has these things, meaning that they were never trained on how to use it. When the training should be conducted, take an example, if an employee comes in for the first time, they should be taught how to use, for example, the email system, the core systems that they have to use. those are trainings that should be part and parcel of the orientation program. The training needs for the specific jobs, maybe if there's a specific system for finance or for sales or whatever it is, that all those should be indicated. The type of trainings that are going to be used. For example, is it going to be e-learning? Is it going to be done in-house, or are they going to get somebody outside to come and give the training? Take an example, when you purchase a system from somewhere else, who should give the training on that? Should it be ICT? Should it be someone inside, or should it be the owners of the system? The person responsible for monitoring and the trainings, where the funds for trainings should come from. And there are times also when you find when there's a job description where they say these are the core competencies we expect the applicants to have. So there are certain skills that a staff member should have, and those that will be imparted on them as their training. For example, one might say, we want to employ someone who has basic computer literacy skills. And then others will say, we would like an employee who has skills in such and such software. Take an example in accounts. There are some accounting systems which may be across the board. Maybe it's an organization which has research, then they may say the person should be able to use SPSS, things like that. So you should, the training manual should also indicate what one must know before coming into the training. So this one, I'll leave you to brainstorm, and we can have a discussion in our next lecture, next weekend. First thing we discuss in your groups, think about the Clarion School for Boys. If you were asked to write the ICT training policy, what would you include in it? Considering that particular case study, we can have this discussion next week. So this should be your guidelines for that brainstorming session, and let's have that discussion next week. Do we have any questions so far on the training policy?
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Doctor. So my question would be like the general policy, ICT policy. So do we include the training policy, or that is like a sub policy? Like you have the general one, and then these other ones are sub policies.
It is a sub policy. A policy has several of them. I had the experience of writing a policy for UMU. It remained as a draft, but I left it as a draft after I left the position. We had the security policy, we had the training policy, we had the password policy, we had the data protection and privacy policy, we had the e-learning policy. So all these were sub-policies making up the entire policy. Have I answered your question?
So they are like the sections of the entire policy, because they have seen some policies. You find it in the section on passwords, like how to access the organization computers, about the strengths of the password, then accessing internet, what you need to access, like sites that should be accessed and download and all of that.
Yes.
So you have one policy, but you break it into like different sections.
And of course, there are things that are unique. There are things that are unique to a particular organization. There are some organizations now, for example, you've stated something like what should be accessed, what information on the website should be accessed. And there are others which leave you open, where they do not limit you. So again, it all depends on the type of organization you have, the very nature of your organization, the unique nature of your organization. So again, these three are the core, and everything else would be attached to it. But again, there are certain policies there are certain sub-policies that would be unique to your organization. Have I, is that one clear?
Yes, yes, it is.
Okay. So let us then look at the security policy. So this one basically looks at how the organization intends to protect its information assets. So this one is key. This one is key. Remember, again, information is the key point of ICT. So so here it would cover your firewall, how you would consider your firewall. It would cover data protection and privacy part, which is it would state which is your public data, which is your protected data, which is your private data, the one that shouldn't, or restricted data. So there are different levels where you'd state what you have your security policy, then you have your data security policy. You can even have a network policy as well, which indicates how your network should be protected. Yeah, so you'd expand it even further. Okay, so it's the security policy can be divided into further policies, just to be more specific on what should be protected and what should not be protected. So I remember, like for us, we had something on information that is exactly how data should be protected. And even in a situation where we outsource, let's say we said it outsource certain services and certain data was go to a third party, how that should be handled. So it can be subdivided further, depending again on the nature of your organization. So the security policy should identify what your potential threats are to your data, allocate the responsibilities, those who are responsible, the resources that are needed. You lay down the staff responsibilities. You have your network administrators and so on and so forth, but also your lay staff member. I would like to say that those who lay in terms of ICT, the other staff members, what they can do to protect the organization's data, because most of the time the data is input by others, not necessarily ICT. So what their responsibilities can be to protect the data, not just the network administrator or the system administrator or things like that, but also, let's say, the person in finance, the person in sales, what their responsibilities would be in protecting that data. Then there are also the others, protection from viruses, and then also the physical security of computers, and the disciplinary procedures in case there's a breach of any of those securities. So any policy, of any sub-policy even, also should include a definition of what specifically it is handling. So for the security data, it should have a definition of what information security is, the overall objectives, the scope, and the importance. I think there's a sample policy that I uploaded on Moodle, but I can also get others just to show you some samples of what a policy would look like. Information security policy. Because information is extremely key, it is important to have this one also, but also separate. Now, this information security policy should be compliant with the national regulatory and legislative requirements. It should be. So that the ICT department should have knowledge of what the national acts or legislations or regulations are on information. Any organization is going to collect information about its customers, its staff members. Take an example. HR has information, private information about you. It has your bank information. It has your family information. So your next of kin, things like that, which are may be private. They are actually private data. So HR, wherever it is storing this information, must know what where it's storing it obviously on an ICT system. So therefore, ICT and HR must be aware of what should happen in case this information is accessed by someone who shouldn't access it. If you have customer information that is sensitive, maybe you're a healthcare institution, look at a university. A university keeps results. Results are, I would say, restricted information. There are only certain people who should access it. Your lecturer, the registry department, and you yourself. If your fellow classmate sees your results, something is wrong. Yeah, a breach has happened. The information security must also state business continuity management. In other words, it should talk about backup of information. Yeah, and also disaster and recovery management. It should look at that. Then the other things that we talk about: network security, usernames and passwords, strengths of a password, and so on and so forth. Internet usage, data encryption, firewalls, all these things that help to ensure that the data that you're keeping, that you're storing, is kept safe. Any questions so far?
Yeah, maybe I have one question on compliance.
Yes.
If you find the registration for the company maybe conflicts with the government, one example would be like social media. Like the government, they broke the use of Facebook. So if you find your company relies on Facebook to get information, but the government has blocked it, but the organization wants to have access to it. So like the ICT manager, can you block like VPNs to the organization? Like what happens in that case?
I think in that case, the ethical element would be to comply with the national regulations. But first and foremost, let me first ask, when the government has blocked, is it part of legislation or it is a temporary thing? Because it does it for a short term, but it's not necessarily part of legislation. When we're talking about legislation, we're talking about the acts that are currently there. The legislation, the laws that are currently governing. Because if government blocks, that's not a law. That is something they've done. It's a strategic move they've done to do maybe for whatever their own purposes, but it's not really part of the law. So when we're talking about legislation, we're talking about the law that is currently there concerning information. For example, I'll give you an example. The Data Protection and Privacy Act of Uganda is something that you should look at. But I don't think if they block it, that's not part of the law. Is it?
No, it's not, it's just temporary. Like it's a measure that is not among the laws.
Yeah, so we're essentially talking about the laws that are currently there. That's essentially what we are talking about. Okay, so we come to again the information security policy. It also has the same structure as the security policy. It should have definitions, it should have objectives, and outline specific responsibilities for people. Then there should be department manuals for all departments that are handling data. And also it should be part of, if there should be a need for signing, especially those who handle data, in part of the Employee Act that they sign to show that they are compliant. So the information security policy is it's extremely important for any organization, extremely important, and all staff should be aware of it, and they should be trained on it as soon as they are part and parcel. So how can this be done? How can this be done? we already talked about it. We talk about training. It should be part of the employee's manual. Department manuals must be provided. And you can think of others of how every staff member should be aware of the security policy. And even you should have, should I say, reminders throughout the lifespan of an employee within an organization. There should be refresher courses to remind staff members of these sensitive issues. Any questions so far or comment?
Doctor, for me, mine would be, I don't know whether it's a question or I think it's a comment, because most of the policies I've seen, especially ICT, you find that again, they keep breaking away ICT. I mean, information security policy, then they break away maybe again information policy, something like that. Okay, out of the big one, again, there are these subs, of which I would think maybe it would be better to have one comprehensive one. For me, that's where sometimes I get confused. Why?
Now, the sub policies, the full document is one. Let me, maybe I can just show you the draft. This was a draft, just a draft, like I said. Let me first stop sharing and let me see if I can find it. It's been a long time since I looked at it. I just want to see if I have I still have that draft policy. No, this is e-learning, sorry. Okay, let me share. So do you see this? This was the draft policy that we did with a colleague. And if you see the table of contents, it has a preamble, scope, and audience, enforcement, and violation. Then it has the sub-policies: ICT acceptable use, ICT standards, user account management, telephone usage, eligibility for ICT resources and services, demilitarized zones, ICT project management, incident management, general software management, change management, third-party network, USB and removal, ICT contingency, internet usage, service level management, support and maintenance, ICT, so this one was a repetition, sorry. User awareness and commitment, information security policy, data classification, password policy, network configuration, system acquisition, and so on and so forth. Here there is e-learning, Google Apps and acceptable use rule, ICT system access. Do you see that this is the policy, the whole policy, but it's which is made up of sub-policies? Robert, I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, Doctor, I can see it.
Yeah.
So that means in this, because there's where I saw, instead of having it as one document, then they were broken down again with the smaller policies separate.
No, this, which one? Where?
There's some organization where I saw
Where they had
main
smaller ones. Now, for some organizations, they will publish maybe the policy which is necessary at a particular time, or they may you may have a particular one given out. Now, take an example. ICT system access control may not be given to everyone. Network physical and environmental security policy may not be given one, but e-learning policy may be given to all of you. Google Apps acceptable use rule may be given to all of you. System acquisition policy may not be given to all of you. Network configuration may not be given to all of you. Data classification policy may be given to some people. So you realize that the policy as a whole, it exists as one, but certain sections may be given out depending on who the audience is.
I get it, Doctor.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let me stop sharing and come back to the slides. Okay, so we come to the other core one, the procurement policy. Why? Because ICT is heavily invested in procurement. So now this particular policy wants to ensure, any ICT head or ICT department wants to ensure that their ICT hardware and software is replenished as its lifespan runs out. Any equipment, like any mechanical equipment, whether it's a car, whatever it is, a TV, any ICT equipment has a lifespan. So the policy must state for how long ICT hardware and software should be retained. And this is why it is important that management signs off on this. I've experienced that where management doesn't really care about hardware and software. They really don't care unless it affects them. I've seen that. I've experienced that and seen that. Yet it is extremely important. Once these things are not done, you find ICT becomes the scapegoat as to why you have old equipment, why you have software that is no longer supported and things like that. Look at the Clarion School for Boys. Look at their situation and what happened. So the policy should state when hardware and software should be replaced. But not only that, it should also ensure that you're getting price reductions, you're getting from the most cost-effective supplier possible. But also you also want to consider compatibility and consistency among all systems. That whatever system you purchase, there must be a compatibility. Now this comes to the point of standards. Yeah, your policy can also have standards. I remember when we were going to start it, one person advised us look at NITA-use standards, because NITA-use, being a government agency, has standards on let's say what hardware should be bought, network equipment, and so on and so forth. So your policy can also state the standards, the minimum standards that procurement should focus on. Your procurement policy can also cover disposal. And here you may want to maybe even to consider the ethical elements. You can think about e-waste, how certain things should be disposed of. So you can consider that. I think there are even some organizations which actually pay organizations to give them their old equipment that they can dispose of them in an ethical manner. So there are some organizations even think about donations. So you can also include that if you wish. So that ends it for policy planning. Do we have any question? We are okay.
Clear.
Okay. So well, that gives us.
Doctor,
Yes, please.
what I wanted to ask is there copyright when it comes to policies, or I can pick a policy as long as it fits?
Yes, you can, as long as it fits your organization.
Okay.
It is perfectly okay. And usually policies are public. Usually organizations want to make their policies public. So if we don't have a question, maybe we can meet again next week when we look at your presentations. Do you have any question or comment regarding your assignment? No, I guess
Not from
nothing. Sorry, Robert, you had a comment?
now. I was saying not from me.
Okay, so since everyone is silent, I'm going to assume that all is going well. So I hope that is the case. So I'll just remind Twina, if you can pass me the groups and the group members so that I can input them in Moodle before you upload. That would be.
Yeah, I'm going to share after the class.
Okay, so okay, thank everyone.